The great hall of Blackthorn Kingdom was full of light and noise on the night the mate bond was announced. Hundreds of wolves stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on the raised platform where Alpha King Kael Draven stood tall in his black coat, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood Elira, a slim young Omega, with downcast eyes and hands folded tightly in front of her. She had come from the lowest ranks of the Ashwood Pack, a place where Omegas were rarely noticed and never celebrated. She had not asked for this moment. She had not asked to be anyone's mate. When the elder wolf finished the binding words and declared that the bond between them was true, silence fell across the hall. Everyone waited for Kael to accept her, to take her hand as tradition demanded. Instead, he looked at her for a long moment, taking in her plain dress, her lowered gaze, her trembling shoulders, and his jaw tightened. "She is silent," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. "She does not even speak in her own defense. What kind of queen would she make? I already have someone chosen for that role, someone with strength and voice enough to stand beside a king." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Elira felt her face grow hot with shame, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that speaking rarely changed anything for wolves like her. She only lifted her chin slightly, refusing to let the tears in her eyes fall in front of so many watching faces. Kael turned to the crowd and, with a wave of his hand, rejected her formally, breaking the bond in front of everyone. The words were sharp and final. He called her weak. He said she would only weaken his kingdom, not strengthen it. He did not know that behind her silence lived something far greater than he could imagine, and that his hasty judgment would follow him for years to come. Elira was given until sunrise to leave the kingdom. No one stopped her as she gathered the little she owned into a worn bag. No one from her own pack stepped forward to comfort her, afraid of drawing the king's anger onto themselves. She walked out of Blackthorn Kingdom alone, her only company, the cold wind, and the sound of her own footsteps on the frozen path. She did not know where she was going. She only knew she could not stay in a place that saw her as nothing. For days she walked, surviving on what little food she could find, sleeping in the shelter of old trees and hollow rocks. The northern wilderness beyond the 9 Kingdoms was a place few wolves dared to enter, filled with harsh winters and ancient dangers. Elira had nothing left to lose, so she pressed forward, deeper into the unknown. It was on the 7th night, as a storm rolled over the mountains and her strength finally gave out, that she collapsed in the snow. She thought that was the end of her story. But instead of darkness, she woke to warmth, to the crackle of a fire, and to the concerned faces of wolves she had never seen before. They called themselves the Hollow Pack, a small group of wolves who lived far from the reach of the 9 Kingdoms, hidden by choice rather than weakness. Their leader, an old wolf named Rowan, studied Elira carefully as she slowly regained her strength by the fire. "You carry a mark," Rowan said one evening, watching her closely. "Behind your ear. Do you know what it means?" Elira reached up and touched the small crescent-shaped mark she had always had, hidden beneath her hair. She had never thought much of it. "It's just a birthmark," she said quietly, her voice rough from days of silence and cold. Rowan shook his head slowly. "It is the mark of the first Alpha line, a bloodline our ancestors once served before it was nearly wiped out generations ago. We believed it was gone forever, yet here you are." Elira did not understand at first. She had grown up believing she was nothing special, an Omega, with no family name worth mentioning, no strength to speak of. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Rowan and the Hollow Pack began to teach her the truth of who she really was. The first Alpha line, they explained, was the original bloodline from which all wolf kingdoms had descended. Long before the 9 Kingdoms divided into separate territories ruled by competing alpha families, there had been one true line of leaders, chosen not by strength alone, but by a rare and ancient connection to the land, the moon, and every wolf under their protection. Fearing the power of this bloodline, rival families had hunted them down centuries ago, in what came to be called the Blood Purge, believing they had ended it completely. Elira's silence, they told her, was never a weakness. It was the reason she had survived undetected for so long. Wolves of the first Alpha line carried a natural instinct to remain quiet and unnoticed until they were ready. A protective trait passed down through generations to keep them safe from those who wished to erase them. At first, Elira struggled to believe any of it. She had spent her whole life being told she was ordinary, easily dismissed, easily replaced. But slowly, as Rowan and the others began training her, she started to feel something stir inside her that she had never allowed herself to notice before. A quiet strength, a steady calm that did not waver even in the face of fear. She learned to fight, clumsily at first, then with growing confidence. She learned to run through the forest without a sound, to sense the presence of others before they even came near. She learned about the elemental bond, an ancient connection only First Bloods could access, allowing her to draw strength from the earth beneath her paws and the wind around her. Most importantly, she learned to speak. Not loudly, not boldly like the wolves she had grown up admiring from a distance, but with quiet confidence that made others listen simply because her words held weight. Word did not spread quickly of the mysterious wolf training in the northern wilderness. Elira preferred it that way. She was not seeking power or revenge. She simply wanted to understand who she truly was, and to build a life for herself, far from the kingdom that had cast her aside. Over the following years, she traveled beyond the Hollow Pack's territory, meeting other forgotten and outcast wolves along the way. Packs that had been pushed to the margins of the Nine Kingdoms, Omegas who had been overlooked, wolves who had lost their homes in territorial disputes between competing alphas. Elira listened to their stories, offered what help she could, and slowly, without ever intending to build an army, she found herself surrounded by wolves who trusted her completely. She did not lead through fear, the way many Alpha Kings did. She led by listening first, by remembering names, by standing beside her people in difficult moments rather than above them. The wolves who followed her did so willingly, drawn not to a title, but to the quiet strength she carried. Meanwhile, in Blackthorn Kingdom, life had not been easy for Kael. His arrangement with Seraphina, daughter of a powerful rival Alpha family, had brought him political strength but little peace. Seraphina was skilled and intelligent, but the bond between them lacked the depth that came from a true mate connection. Kael told himself he did not need such things. A king needed strength and strategy, not sentiment. Yet there were nights when he found himself thinking of the quiet Omega he had rejected all those years ago, wondering, in moments he would never admit to anyone, whether he had made a mistake. He pushed the thought away each time, telling himself he had done what was necessary for his kingdom. The peace of the Nine Kingdoms did not last forever. A powerful empire from beyond their borders, one that had long viewed the Wolf Kingdoms as a threat to be eliminated, began its invasion during a harsh winter few had prepared for. Their soldiers moved with terrifying speed, overwhelming smaller territories one by one, showing no mercy to wolves who resisted. Blackthorn Kingdom, despite its strength, found itself struggling against the invading forces. Kael fought at the front of his army, but even his skill and experience could not hold back the tide indefinitely. Kingdom after kingdom fell or retreated, and it became clear that no single Alpha King could stand against this threat alone. It was in the darkest hour of the war, as Blackthorn's forces found themselves surrounded and outnumbered on a frozen battlefield, that reinforcements arrived from the north. An army no one recognized, moving with discipline and purpose, wolves from packs long forgotten by the Nine Kingdoms, fighting side by side under a single banner. At the front of this army ran a wolf unlike any Kael had ever seen. Her fur carried a striking pattern of black and silver, a mark that seemed to glow faintly under the winter moon. She moved through the battlefield with calm precision, and wherever she passed, the invading soldiers fell back in confusion, as though some ancient force worked against them. When the fighting finally ended, and the invaders retreated in defeat, Kael approached the wolf, who had turned the tide of the battle. As she shifted back into her human form, exhaustion evident in her posture, but her eyes steady and clear, he found himself staring into a face he had once dismissed as unremarkable. Elira, he could hardly find words. The silent Omega he had rejected years ago, now stood before him as the leader of an army that had saved his kingdom, her presence commanding respect from every wolf on the battlefield, including his own soldiers. News of what happened spread quickly across the Nine Kingdoms. Elders and scholars who had studied the old records confirmed what the Hollow Pack had known for years. The mark Elira carried was undeniably that of the first Alpha bloodline, a lineage believed extinct for centuries. Under the ancient laws that still governed the Wolf Kingdoms, This bloodline held authority above any reigning Alpha King, a truth few living wolves had ever expected to witness. The kingdoms, shaken by the war and grateful for the intervention that had saved countless lives, could not deny what stood before them. One by one, Alpha Kings and their advisors began to acknowledge Alira's claim, some out of genuine respect for what she had done, others simply recognizing that opposing her would be unwise. Seraphina, watching the shifting balance of power with careful eyes, made the practical decision to withdraw her family's alliance with Kael before the situation became a liability for her own kingdom. Kael, watching the world he had built around his own authority begin to crumble, finally understood the weight of what he had thrown away years before. He sought Alira out one final time, away from the crowds and the political discussions consuming the 9 kingdoms. He found her standing quietly near the edge of the forest, watching the sunrise with the same calm expression she always carried now, so different from the frightened, silenced girl he remembered. "I was wrong," he said, his voice lacking its usual command. "I judged you before I understood you. If the bond can still be honored, I would ask for the chance to make things right." Alira turned to him, and for a moment, something like sadness crossed her face, though it did not linger. "You were not wrong to feel unsure that night," she said quietly. "But you were wrong to make your judgment so quickly, and wrong to be so cruel in front of everyone who was watching. A bond built on respect cannot be repaired by desperation once it has been broken by contempt." Kael had no response to that. He simply nodded, accepting the truth of her words, and watched as she turned to walk back toward the wolves who had gathered to await her. In the months that followed, the 9 kingdoms underwent a transformation few could have predicted. Alira was formally recognized as the first sovereign Alpha Queen in centuries, a leader who answered to no single kingdom but held the trust and respect of every pack, forgotten or powerful, that had once been overlooked by the old systems of rule. She did not rule through fear or bloodline alone. She ruled the way she always had, by listening, by remembering the wolves who had once been invisible to those in power, by proving that quiet strength could accomplish what loud authority never could. Kael remained the Alpha King of Blackthorn Kingdom, his territory intact but his influence forever changed. He watched from a distance as the woman he had once called weak became the most respected leader the Wolf Kingdoms had known in generations. He never spoke of that night in the Great Hall again, though the memory of it stayed with him as a quiet reminder of how easily pride could blind a person to the truth standing right in front of them. As for Alira, she stood before the unified packs on the day of her formal recognition, her silence no longer a source of shame, but a symbol of the strength she had carried all along, unseen and unheard until the moment she chose to let it be known. The wolves who had once overlooked her now looked to her with genuine respect, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it, one quiet act of courage at a time. And though the 9 kingdoms would face many more challenges in the years ahead, they faced them knowing that true strength did not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waited patiently, hidden behind silence, until the world was finally ready to see it.